Okay, good afternoon, colleagues. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you on. I mean, every day is historic these days, so this is just one of many. Just to situate Prospect in your mind, in case you're not so familiar with us, we have 100. That obviously makes you so happy. That's what can I say? We have 145,000 members. We're the 7th, 8th largest union in the TUC. We are not affiliated to the Labour Party, but though clearly many of our representatives, and indeed myself, are party members. Our attitude to the whole issue of Brexit and jobs is influenced by our members' occupations, their industries, and their attitudes. 70% of our members voted to remain, our polling tells us. So that's maybe not surprising, given that our members come from a technical, scientific and creative background. The vast majority of their industries are directly affected by the consequences of the Brexit choice, and they can see, obviously, the looming clouds on the horizon. Politically, broad church, 42% of our members at the last election voted Labour, but there's a steady 25, 26 to 27% of our members who vote Conservative. And so consequently, the way we go about framing our position on these things needs to reflect the nature of the membership. What I want to contribute to this debate, probably because I've got a greater freedom, not being an affiliated union and having the membership vote the way they did in terms of the referendum, is simply to focus on what we think the real issue around Brexit is. And that's the agenda behind Brexit. And in saying this, it can simply be summarised, and I don't mind saying this in a relatively challenging way, that a left exit is a fantasy. And we start from that premise because we've experienced the consequences of a labour law, for power dynamics at work, of right-wing governments in the last 3 decades. And there is no doubt in our mind that behind the Brexit agenda is a desire to accelerate and intensify control, to further imbalance power relationships at work, and deeply impact the nature of the employment relationship. And when I say employment, I mean the whole spectrum of forms that employment comes in. And let's just be honest, and this is where the idea that we can successfully navigate outside the European Union as an independent labour movement with great confidence. Let's look at where we are. And in saying this, that's not to say there isn't a deep need for reform within the European Union in terms of some of its democratic content and indeed some of the judgments that the European Court have been associated with in the employment field. But on balance, the European Union has been a major bulwark in relation to employment laws in this country since we commenced our membership. And there is no doubt, but for that, governments of the right so inclined would have by now attacked other things which are protected by the parent European Union directives. Look at where we are just with unfair dismissal law, which isn't protected by a European directive. 2 years in this country, and you can be dismissed for any reason whatsoever. If there is anything which is symbolic about what is potentially wrong about our future, it's that sort of example. And of course, there are other challenging statistics, the rollback of trade unionism, that in the private sector, where the majority of our members are, 15% coverage, and the complete rollback of worker voice. We are in the most extraordinary of times on a daily basis. But we all should pause last week and read the FT. I'm sure you all do every day. And when the FT is saying that capitalism needs a reset, it's time to think very carefully about where we're going. And that piece in the FT and other associated articles demonstrate that there is a really auspicious set of circumstances if we get the right political prescription with the right engagement from trade unions and civic society to reset capitalism. But we will not have a reset of capitalism if we exit the European Union in the circumstances that so far have influenced the discussions. And unless we're clear about the realities of the strengths of the labour movement in an environment that could be post-Brexit. There is an ideology here. There's an ideology which is completely inimical to progressive standards. Much of what Labour has been talking about at this conference is to be welcomed. Some of it I would frame differently. I don't see every employer as a threat. I don't see every employer as necessary to fight. My own union has just completed a rebrand where we're talking about being the union for ambition. And what we're saying is unions should help people to get on, but we will help people get even if they need it. But it's important that we're able to create an environment where if we're going to reset capitalism, we take business with us. Collective bargaining requires consenting partners. If we're going to reimagine and re-energize collective bargaining, it's not a good idea to fight every employer who may be inclined to engage with you on that territory. You will need a degree of consent from capitalism to refashion it. So we, I think, have got to, in the next few weeks ahead, and as we head into even more decision points around Brexit, be clear what the real agenda is about. It's about creating in this country a low tax, low regulation, low employment rights, low road economy, and the only people who will suffer are the very ones that this government, through its populist acts, are drawing to their side. It's vital that we keep this argument very clearly in people's minds, because Brexit will damage jobs and it will damage employment, and along with that it will damage employment rights.